let's talk about PCS. And I want to tell you the place where you miss the boat on PCS. Remember, it's never needed for an emergency. It's needed for non-emergencies, every non-emergency. For non-repetitives, a lot of people can sign it for you. Not an LPN, but a discharge planner, a registered nurse, or a physician assistant. And you know what I see? People missing the boat all the time on the 21-day rule. Do you know what that is? That you can bill the claim if you don't have the PCS? There's a rule about that. And the rule is, and it's only for non-repetitive, if you can't get the PCS at the time of service, you're supposed to get it before service or at the time of service. If you can't get the PCS form, document your attempts to get it. How do you document your attempts to get a PCS form? The acceptable documentation is a certified mailing. I didn't say certified letter. I said certified mailing. And the certified mailing is a book you get at the post office. And it's got, you know how I have this form here? It almost looks like this. It's got a bunch of lines on it, okay? And what you do is you put your patient name, you put a certified number on it, and the little slip from the certified mailing. You take 15 letters, or if you've got 3 pages, 45 letters, to the post office window with the book. And what the post office does is they take their red stamp that says USPS and today's date, they stamp that page in the book. If you do not have a PCS back in 21 days, you can bill that claim. A lot of people don't realize, and this has been in the regulations forever, you can go to 41 CFR 410.40, which is, if you Google 41 CFR 42 CFR 410.40, that's the Code of Federal Regulations. That's actually the ambulance fee schedule. It is in there from February 27, 2002. It's other places online as well. But a physician certification is something we are all supposed to obtain. However, everybody knows that you can't always get them from a doctor or a facility. So this exception was created. This exception says, we understand that you're supposed to get it. If you could not get it, then show us proof that you tried. Proof is from another government agency, the U.S. Postal Service. You can send a certified letter, it just costs $5 a shot. If you use the certified book that you get from the post office, it costs about $1 a shot. You're still sending the little green cards out to doctors to get this. And if it does not come back in 21 days, you could bill that claim. It's called the 21-day rule. And be careful here. If you have a bunch of claims sitting around the house from 3 months ago, from 6 months ago, because you don't have a PCS, go to the bathroom, open the door, take the lid off the toilet, and flush. You're done. The rule says you're supposed to have it before the date of service. The rules at the time of service. The rule says you're supposed to have it at the time of service. If you don't have it, then we gave you an exception. We said, look, send it out. Get a certified request out there. We'll let you bill the claim. You can't be asking months later for PCSs for the same reason that you can't tell me what you had for breakfast last Tuesday. You can't go to doctors and facilities much later and say, hey, you know that patient we transported for you last February 12th? Did he need an ambulance? Sign it. No. Flush. And then fix it going forward. Let a new day dawn. Here, I'll make it all better. Wave the magic. a new day has dawned. Okay? And going forward, get that fixed for yourself so you're not missing legitimate opportunities. Repetitive patients are medically necessary ambulance transport that's furnished 3 or more times during a 10-day period, or at least once a week for 3 weeks. So the first time you transport a dialysis patient, he is not a repetitive patient. You can get a regular PCS. He becomes a repetitive patient when he meets this mark, and then you need the repetitive PCS, which has to be signed by a doctor, obtained prior to service, and it's good for 60 days. All right. You know you need a beneficiary signature. You know the best place is to get the patient to sign it. You know that if you can't get the patient to sign it, it goes to the patient's rep, and if you can't get that, you need to see on the form why the patient could not sign. You need to see who signed instead, and you can go to the facility. Crew members should never sign. So what happens if you don't get a signature? If you don't get a signature, you have a choice. Send a bill and send a signature form. That's PWW's signature form. You don't need to use that. You just need to get the signature and the signature language. And use lifetime signature language. Now, preparing claims, you want to make sure you're coding to the proper level of service using the HCPCS code that is supported in the documentation. If the documentation supports it, don't be afraid of it. Billing is like electricity. You have to have respect for billing, not fear for it. I am not going to take a shower and stand in the wet bathtub and use my curling iron at the same time. Dumb. That's disrespectful of electricity. But do I have a hairdryer and a curling iron in the bathroom? Of course I do. I'm just not standing there with the water running while I'm doing that. And I have GFIs in the bathroom, ground fault interrupters, if there's anything going on. So billing and electricity have a lot in common. You should be knowledgeable and respectful of it, but don't be afraid of it. If you've got the documentation to support it, go for it. And if you need a denial, bill for that. And when you are talking about explaining your claim, a lot of you use the notes section of your claim to explain what's going on. Did you know nobody ever reads that? I know. Isn't that a bummer? So here you are agonizing because you only have 80 characters, and you're trying to figure out what to put in those 80 characters to explain what's going on with your claim. And sometimes you just regurgitate the whole trip report. As much like you're abbreviating and you're redoing it, and like 10 minutes later you're still trying to figure this out. The time that gets read is if you have a denial. So yes, it is advisable to fill out the narrative section of the claim because it can be helpful to you, but you don't need to put what's already in the trip report. Maybe put some specifics that explain this trip, like why you're going for a CAT scan when you're leaving a hospital that has a CAT scan. So use it wisely so you're not doing more work than you have to, because you already have to do a lot of work. Did you know the rules are different for Medicare managed care? So most people don't know that there's a whole different set of manuals that govern Medicare managed care, and that the definitions for emergency are different under Medicare managed care. So you want to familiarize yourself. There is a publication on CMS website called 100-16. When you go to 100-16, there are a whole bunch of chapters that have to deal with Medicare managed care, and it impacts all kinds of providers, including ambulance. So there's chapter 13, which the link is here, for all your appeals and grievances, and then there's chapter 4. And within chapter 4, it says what is covered by ambulance or ambulance. And the MAO, which is Medicare Advantage Organization, is responsible for ambulance services, including those dispatched through 911, when either an emergency situation exists or other means of transport would endanger the beneficiary's health. The enrollee, the patient, is financially responsible for plan allowed cost sharing. You can find the original rules for coverage. So they have to cover what Medicare covers, but they can cover more than what Medicare covers. And they use the prudent layperson language for emergency instead of what we see for emergency response under Medicare. You know, serious jeopardy to health, serious impairment to bodily function, serious dysfunction of any bodily part. And even if the patient is later found not to have an emergency situation when they get to the ER, Medicare Advantage still has to pay you. That's written in the rules. It doesn't say that in the Medicare rules. It says it in the Medicare Advantage rules, and that's in section 20.2. So they are responsible to pay for emergency services plus post-stabilization care or urgently needed services. However, coverage is a lot different than payment. See, Medicare Advantage plans cover what Medicare covers, but they do not have to pay anybody who gives those services. Emergencies, they have to pay, but non-emergency services don't get paid just because you did the service. Non-emergencies get paid through contract or network participation, and here is the kicker. You cannot bill the patient. If you did a non-emergency and you are not within the network or you don't have a contract with that payer, you are prohibited from billing the patient. Think about this. If this had been a straight Medicare patient and that Medicare patient had a non-emergency service, it would have been covered. If the patient had the services provided by a contracted provider, it would have been covered. If that patient is getting a non-emergency service, they are probably within a hospital or within a center. What control does a patient have over who transports them when they're a hospital or a patient? None. None at all. You show up, you transport the patient. That patient has no choice in that matter at all. So why would the patient be held financially responsible? And these aren't Maggie's rules, these are the regs. So, what happens if you did a non-emergency transport for one of these Medicare Advantage patients? And remember what I said, now 30%, so 1 in 3, basically on average, patients who are Medicare patients are in one of these managed care plans. There is a waiver, and you can appeal. But what the waiver says is you, by signing, agree that you are not pursuing the patient. Period. The waiver is at the end of the manual, at the end of chapter 13. And you will find that there are insurers who will ask you for it. They want a copy of it. So here's what could have happened. Maybe you're the only provider in town. Or there is, this patient is visiting their family here from California. They're in Kaiser. Kaiser's big in California. There's no way you would ever be a Kaiser provider. They don't even offer provider networks in this area. You might have taken the patient. In good faith, you are the only guys who could have taken the patient. So you're going to appeal it based on that fact. But you're going to have to sign the waiver. You cannot pursue the patient. You have some interesting things going on with Medicaid managed care. Going to grow big time in this state. Big time. And in fact, it is now over 70% of all Medicaid services are done by managed care plans. And you don't have transport brokers here, do you? Oh, good. You don't have Logisticare or any of those guys here? See, I know I said a bad word. I'm sorry. Yeah, you don't want that. So the Medicaid managed care is under the ACA, emergencies are covered services. So there is a list of essential services that are required by the Affordable Care Act. Emergency services are part of that, so they are covered. no matter who renders them. It is non-emergencies that get dicey. And non-emergencies have no guarantee of payment. They're typically done by contract or network participation. So as this evolves more, and I know that the association is working on some of these issues with you, but as this evolves more, you're going to see this whole contract issue becoming more and more a hot button topic as you deal with these patients and non-emergency transport. So when you deal with them, you will find that they are not all very good at interpreting whether this is a Medicare managed care plan or a Medicaid managed care plan. They're not always good at interpreting the regulations. This is where you have to be diligent. So how do you find out what to do? Two things you can look at on your state's website. You can find the actual contract that exists between the state of Louisiana and the managed care plans. And within that contract, it will say what those plans are supposed to cover. That they're supposed to cover emergencies, what they are supposed to do as far as non-emergencies, what they can or cannot do as far as cost sharing and co-pays go. It will be outlined in the state's agreement with the plans. So find that information and read it in case you ever need to copy that section and email it to somebody. Also, look to see what the medical policies are for the various insurers. And that is often available on the insurers or payers' websites. So look to see what the state is requiring coverage for, and look to see what the medical policies of the plans are. And unlike fee-for-service, Medicaid managed care is driven first by regulation and next by the contract. So you can also look at your website and see what is supposed to be covered as far as medical transportation, and use that in your discussions with them. And provider relations does not always cut the mustard. You'll just be like a dog chasing your tail talking to them. You need to get higher than them. You need to get a supervisor. Or you need to get to their compliance department. Or if you have a big issue, check around, call the association office, see if other people are having the same issue. Probably if you're having a big issue, so are other providers. Join forces. This is where the association can be helpful to you. But with all the growth that's going to go on in Medicaid's expansion and more into Medicaid managed care, being savvy about how to navigate this is going to be critical. You can't approach it like it's any other commercial claim, because it's not. So mental health is going to be a two-tiered process. The first transport, the transport to the emergency room, goes to the patient's main insurance. So if the patient has Aetna, for example, that emergency trip gets billed as an emergency to the patient's main insurance. It's the second trip where the Aetnas and Cignas, they all have a subcontractor, another insurer who handles mental or behavioral health. Magellan is one that handles behavioral health. And so that would be a separate discussion. And usually non-emergencies are going to be done by their contracted provider, but it's handled completely by a separate payer. And Aetna will be Magellan's problem, Keystone's problem. Did I mention that healthcare sucks? Sometimes it just sucks. That's a technical term. All right? The situations that you have described, indeed, there are hospital-to-hospital transports that are emergency. Not every hospital-to-hospital transport is an emergency. But in the United States of America, it is the payer who calls the shot. We could waive that, and I wish it really did work for you. I do. But what was it, that technical term I used? I don't have to keep saying it. It doesn't It's just not a perfect system. We are getting paid for these services. It might be that you have to bill it at a non-emergency level and fight. You may have to fight at the contract level. But if you're getting some reimbursement, that's better than none. And this might be a battle that the association or you as united providers and a united voice can change. But this is not a Louisiana issue. All right, facility billing. Your facility contract should be shared with the billing people, and if you have a billing company, they should be shared with your billing company so that payment policies and payment expectations are discussed and everybody understands what they are. Being upfront with them may save future headaches, but there are compliance considerations that impact getting them paid. And the OIG has discussed this, the Office of Inspector General has discussed this. They've talked about SNF discounting. You can discount a wee little bit. They never have given us an exact number, wee little bit. I recommend you stay near Medicare allowable as far as facilities go. You should, because you might be discounting a wee little bit, be getting paid promptly from those facilities. Because what the Office of Inspector General does not want to have happen is that you are getting Part B trips out of them for which you are getting paid promptly by Medicare, and then you're letting the facility treat you like the Bank of America and they're waiting forever to pay you. Yeah, we all have money problems. It's a very small violin. I feel for them not. Be prompt in your collection tactics with facilities, and this is business to business debt. Watch your facilities closely in your accounts receivable. They should pay you promptly, 30 days, I'd like less. They string providers along. Send your invoices to them via secure email with a read receipt request. By the way, if you're following up with a commercial payer and you've been talking to them, you can send an email to them too, or send things via secure email to them too. Then you have a time and date stamped record of what happened, okay? But make sure that you're after the facilities promptly. Here are a couple more manuals. Go to your appeals and grievances for Medicare Managed Care. Go to Chapter 4 to see the benefits. And do some internal audits, all right? We have a webinar on our website on how to do your own internal audits. It's not that hard, folks. Make yourself, this is part of a good compliance plan, checks and balances. So this week, audit BLS emergencies. Take a handful of them. Have somebody who did not bill them do this. So if Mary billed BLS emergencies, have Susie review 20 BLS emergencies to see if they were billed properly, to make sure you didn't miss anything, that it was a BLS and not an ALS. Maybe next week you'll flip it, and Susie will look at all your hospital to nursing home discharges. Look at things like signatures, look at things like levels of service, look at origins and destinations, and rotate it. Then look at various payers and rotate it. And just take a small batch of claims that you just like pull out of the middle of the batch and do an internal audit on yourself. It's part of catching documentation and billing errors, okay? How about self-pay? Problem for you? All right. There's going to be a lot of changes coming later this year with credit reporting, major overhaul credit reporting, and this is a result of healthcare. There's been a huge growth in patient deductibles. People have like $6,000 deductibles plus their co-payments. So more people have insurance, they just have to pay more to get the coverage. So the major credit reporting bureaus. Credit reporting bureau is different than a collection agency. The credit bureaus are Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. What they used to do is take claims and report it to a patient's credit at like 120 days. They are going to change for health care to a 180-day waiting period. Let me be very clear. A credit bureau is not a collection agency. You can send your claims, unpaid claims, to a collection agency much sooner than 180 days, but it cannot hit somebody's credit until it's 180 days old. And it's being done to allow insurance payments to be captured. So it's going to be implemented this year. These high deductibles are causing some people to postpone health services. And when people postpone health services, because the average single deductible in the United States is now $2,000 and the family average is $4,500, when they postpone services, guess what happens? They need emergency service. They get in trouble. It gets bad, it exacerbates, and suddenly it's an emergency. So you're the one who ends up dealing with the deductible and the self-pay. And look at how the country is broken apart into average single deductibles. So down here, $1,172 is the average single deductible. I don't know about you, but I don't have $1,100 just hanging around the house waiting to be paid on health care services. So two major organizations got together. We say the ACA, and that's the Affordable Care Act, but the ACA is the Association of Credit and Collections Professionals as well, and the Healthcare Financial Management Association. These are the leaders in the United States on healthcare finance and management. And they formed a medical debt task force, and they developed a list of what they say are best practices. And what their list of best practices is, first and foremost, they said your bill should be patient-friendly. It should be clear, it should be concise, it should be correct. Have you ever gotten healthcare bills yourself? Of course you have. Does it look like Greek? It's insane. Well, go back and look at your bills. If it went to your elderly mother, would she understand it? Okay, well then clean it up if it needs to be. And your financial, I'll be right there, your financial communications, your things about financial matters, whenever possible, should be discussed with patients up front. You can't do that in an emergency situation, but there are times in some non-emergency situations you could do it. A long-distance transport. Patient education. You should be doing patient education. And I'll finish this and then come to your question. How the heck do you educate patients about money? Do you have a website? Does your website say anything at all about money? Or what you charge for services? Or that you have a hardship policy and that you will help people who can't pay? Does it say anything about that? Other healthcare providers do, hospitals do. We in the ambulance industry have strayed away from that because we're community service organizations. It's like, oh, we can't touch that. We are doing patients a disservice by not talking about money. Now, we don't have to talk about money in the midst of the emergency call, but we can have things on our websites. When we put out our marketing materials or our fundraising issues, we can explain what it costs us to render service, and that's why we charge for service. That's patient education.